Today, June 7th, 2026, Venus and Jupiter reached exact conjunction in Cancer. And if you have been carrying something unresolved, a connection that never fully closed, a name that surfaces in the quiet between things, a pull you have explained away more times than you can count, what you are feeling in the quality of this day is not your imagination. It is your field receiving, before the mind has language for it, the specific weight of what just opened in the sky above you. This is not a general emotional sensitivity. This is a precise event, the karmic love gate, the meeting of the planet of deep feeling and the planet of cosmic expansion inside the sign that never forgets. It does not open on a schedule you control. It does not ask whether you are ready. It simply opens when the conditions that required its opening have been met. And something in the invisible architecture of what you have been living through brought you to this exact transmission at this exact moment because the conditions have been met by you, in private, over a very long time. Before we go deeper, like this video, subscribe, and write in the comments. The gate is open, not for the algorithm, for yourself, as the statement of where you actually are. Because something in the sky today is not subtle. And what it means for you is specific enough that you deserve to hear it clearly, from the beginning, without softening what it actually is. Here is what most people will not understand about this moment. The fact that you are here is not random. It is not accidental. It is the direct result of a specific kind of internal work you have been doing, not loudly, not with announcements, not with anyone watching, that required you to keep going even when nothing on the outside confirmed it was doing anything at all. There was a fork. At some point in the past months, maybe more than once, you were standing at a place where two directions were available. One direction was easier. One direction would have brought faster relief. One direction was more socially acceptable, more immediately rewarding, more aligned with what the people around you thought the healthy option looked like. And you chose the other one. Not because someone told you to, not because it felt better in the short term, because something in you, at a level below where words form, recognized that the easier direction would have cost you something you couldn't afford to lose, even if you couldn't name exactly what that was at the time. That quiet internal choice, made in private, unrewarded, and unseen, is the precise credential this moment requires. The universe does not open what you are about to walk through for people who chose the comfortable road. It opens it for people who recognized, without proof and without fanfare, that the harder direction was the only one that led anywhere real. That is not a small thing. Most people standing where you stood chose relief. They chose the version of the story that asked less of them. Not because they are weak, because relief is a reasonable thing to want when you are in pain. But you did not choose relief. You chose something slower and more demanding, and ultimately more real. And the door you are standing in front of today is the direct consequence of that. Stay with that. What comes next depends on understanding why you specifically earned this window. Today, June 7th, 2026, two specific forces in the sky are doing something that only happens once in approximately a year. Venus, the planet that governs everything you desire, everything you love, every connection that has ever made you feel like you were more fully alive inside it, is moving toward an exact conjunction with Jupiter in the sign of Cancer. They are so close right now that the energy between them is already fully active, already shaping your emotional field, already changing the quality of what is available to you. Venus is not simply the planet of romance, though it governs that too. Venus is the force that makes you care. It is the planet that determines what you reach toward, what you protect, what you give your energy to when no one is requiring you to give it. Venus in Cancer, and it has been in Cancer since mid-May. moves through love the way water moves, not in straight lines, not with strategy, but with depth, with memory, with a pull that follows the contours of what it has always felt. Venus in Cancer doesn't love efficiently. It loves completely, or it doesn't love at all. It holds on to things. It carries the imprint of old connections, the way the shoreline carries the shape of the tides that have touched it across years. When Venus is here, it is not asking you to move on. It is asking you to understand what you are actually holding and why you are still holding it. Not as a failing, as intelligence. Jupiter is something else entirely. Jupiter is the force of expansion. The planet that takes whatever it touches and makes it larger, deeper, more unavoidable. When Jupiter contacts Venus, it doesn't just amplify attraction, it amplifies truth. It makes what was quietly real, suddenly undeniable. Where there were whispers, there are now declarations, not from mouths necessarily, but from the soul itself. Jupiter in Cancer has been building all year toward exactly this conjunction. It has been softening what was hardened, widening what was narrow, making the emotional space between people more permeable, more honest than it has been in a very long time. Jupiter in Cancer doesn't let you hide from what you feel. It doesn't let the person connected to you hide either. It simply makes the feeling too large for whatever container was previously containing it. When these two planets meet at 25 degrees of Cancer, the sign of home, the sign of emotional memory, the sign of the roots you carry with you, into every room you have ever walked into. What they create together is a gate, not a metaphor. A real opening in the emotional space between two people who share a connection that was never truly finished. The karmic love gate is what happens when the planet of deep feeling meets the planet of cosmic expansion inside the sign that never forgets. It doesn't ask whether you are ready. It doesn't consult your preferences. It simply opens. And what was real is suddenly undeniable again. And then there is the moon, sitting today in Pisces, the sign that makes the walls between what is felt and what is acknowledged almost invisible. The moon in Pisces softens every defense that reason built. It makes the interior of both people in a connection suddenly accessible in a way that ordinary days do not permit. Mercury, currently in Cancer in its pre-retrograde shadow, is beginning to pull thought backward, back toward what was not said, toward conversations that ended before they were finished, toward the words that were in the throat and chose silence instead. It does not let the mind move only forward right now. It carries you back to what still needs to be addressed. This is not you being emotional about something that has already ended. This is the sky doing something precise, and your body receiving the translation before your mind has the language for it. This gate does not open for everyone. That distinction matters, and it is worth naming clearly. There is a specific kind of person this activation reaches, and that person is defined not by what they wanted, but by how they loved when the return was incomplete. There are people who gave without the guarantee of return, not naively. They knew what they were giving, and they gave it anyway. Because the depth of what they felt required it. They kept their standard. They kept their integrity. They did not shrink what they offered to match what they were receiving. And when what they received turned out to be partial, present sometimes, absent others, warm in private and cool in public, they did not perform their hurt. They carried it with a quiet that most people around them never fully registered. They did not reduce what they were to be easier to hold. They did not become smaller to fit inside a container that was already insufficient. Here is the thing about how you loved through this. You saw what was actually happening, not the version that was easier to accept, not the interpretation that required the least from you to defend. You saw the real dynamic, the imbalance that ran beneath the warmth, the gap between how much you gave and how much was met. And you stayed with that honest vision even when the comfortable story was right there and would have required so much less from you to maintain. That quality of honest seeing is rare. It is also exactly what this moment requires of you. That was not love failing. That was love being honest about what it was working with. That was not you being unworthy of receiving. That was them being unready to give. That was not the universe withholding. That was the universe building in you a specific kind of internal knowing that cannot be acquired any other way. The knowing of the difference between depth and performance. The knowing of what real presence feels like, as distinct from its convincing imitation. The knowing, settled in the body rather than concluded by the mind, of exactly what you will and will not accept. Not as a rule you set, but as a truth you now simply are. What you built inside yourself across that period, the clarity, the groundedness, the refusal to let pain make you smaller, is not a consolation for what didn't come. It is the specific internal position that makes this gate visible to you at all. You can see this opening because of what you chose to see clearly when seeing clearly was harder. You are not standing here triumphant. You are standing here grounded. And grounded is exactly where this next part asks you to be. Before we go further, there is something that needs to be said about the silence, because the silence may be the thing you have been carrying the longest, and its meaning is not what you have been told. The delay in this was not punishment. It was not indifference. It was not evidence that what you felt was wrong, or that the connection was something you invented or inflated. The universe does not delay out of cruelty. It delays out of precision. And the precision it was applying here is this. If this had arrived 6 months ago, if the gate had opened then, if the energy had been this clear and this available that many months back, you would have walked through it and returned to the same dynamic. Not because you are weak, because the lesson inside the contract was not yet complete. And here is the thing about that particular truth that cuts deepest. The reunion would have felt like resolution. That is the part that would have made it so difficult to identify as repetition. It would have felt like arrival. It would have felt like the story finally turning in the direction you had been holding out for. The warmth would have been real. The relief would have been enormous. And within weeks or months, maybe longer, maybe not as long as you would have hoped, the shape of the old dynamic would have reasserted itself. The same emotional template between you would have quietly reestablished its familiar positions. The same pattern of you absorbing uncertainty and calling it love. The same gap between what you offered and what was met. The same connection, dressed in the language of a new beginning but functioning as a continuation of the old contract. With the lesson still inside it, still unpaid, still waiting. The silence protected you from returning before you were genuinely different. Saturn is the planet that governs these delays. Saturn is not mean. Saturn is a builder. It does not open what you are not built to hold. And what it has been building in you, through the waiting, through the stretches of nothing, through the moments when you wondered if this was simply what loss felt like dressed as timing, is the version of you that can hold this now without immediately organizing yourself around the old dynamic. The delay didn't end because enough time accumulated. It ended because you became capable of something you weren't capable of before. Duration alone doesn't do that. Transformation does. And what arrives through this gate arrives to someone who has already done the work the contract was always pointing toward. That changes everything about what is possible here. There is something happening on the other side of the silence that you may not be tracking, because you have been focused, understandably, on your own experience of this. The person connected to you is not in a simple place right now. And Venus conjunct Jupiter in Cancer, this specific energy, in this exact window, does not respect the systems people have built to keep certain feelings organized at a manageable distance. This person knows what they feel. They have always known. What they have been doing, across the period of silence, is constructing a framework of reasons for why the distance makes sense. Reasons that held under ordinary conditions, that served a function, that were convincing enough to live inside for a while. Reasons about timing, about practicality, about what they are and are not ready for. The problem with reasons that were always standing in for honesty is this. They hold until the emotional reality becomes larger than the framework can contain. And Jupiter expanding inside Cancer, inside the feeling this connection always carried. That expansion is precisely what is happening right now. The framework is running out of its convincing power. Not all at once, not as a sudden collapse. But there are specific moments, today or earlier this week, where a sentence they have been completing privately, one of the ones they use to explain the silence to themselves, stops landing. The ending that used to feel like a conclusion now feels like a theory. The distance that used to feel like clarity now feels like a decision that is costing something. They are aware, at a level they are not fully comfortable with, that the narrative they have been living inside is thinner than the feeling it was built to contain. There is a specific restlessness that comes with this awareness. Not productive restlessness, not the kind that moves toward action, the kind that circles, the kind where they start a thought about you and cannot find the ending that satisfies. Where the logic they built to hold the distance in place still functions technically, but no longer feels honest. Where they are watching themselves maintain a position they no longer fully believe. This transit does not promise that they will act on this awareness. What they do with it is entirely their work. What this transit guarantees is that the awareness itself is now unavoidable. Louder than the management system, clearer than the distance, more persistent than any framework of reasons they have assembled. What they feel is no longer a question. The only question is whether they can afford the honesty it requires. And that is their work to carry, not yours. You are standing at a fork right now, and the fork does not look dramatic from the outside. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary evening, an ordinary stretch of days, a regular week that has no obvious external stakes. That is exactly what makes it the most important kind. Because the choices that permanently change the direction of a life almost never look important in the moment they are made. One version of where you are in this moment is the version that grips. It is the version that takes this energy, this opening, this clarity, this sense that something is finally moving, and tries to direct it toward the outcome the mind has already mapped. Not because this is a character failure, because gripping is what the old pattern knows how to do. It feels like agency. It feels like refusing to be passive about something that matters. But the gripping, if you sit with it honestly, is the old fear running through new language. It is control dressed as care. It is urgency dressed as love. And there is another quality entirely. It doesn't announce itself. It is something much quieter, and in the quiet is where all of its power lives. The version of you that has done enough work to understand that what is genuinely aligned does not require you to hold it in place. That real things do not need to be managed. That the connection, which was always meant to find its resolution, will find it. Not because you engineered the circumstances correctly, but because you finally stopped interfering with what was already trying to move. The body knows the difference between these two states, even when the mind tries to present them as equivalent. Gripping has a specific physical quality, a tightening in the jaw, a quality of thought that accelerates, an orientation forward that is more like bracing than genuine movement. allowing has a different quality entirely. The weight being set down, not dropped, but genuinely set down. The shoulders doing something they haven't been permitted to do in a while. A breath that goes one actual inch deeper than the one before it. This is not a transmission asking you to be passive about your life. It is asking you something more specific. Can you feel, right now in this moment, the difference between moving from alignment and moving from the fear that if you don't move, the moment will close without you? This is not the universe withholding. This is the universe waiting to see which version of you steps forward. That question, held in the body rather than analyzed in the mind, will show you exactly where you actually are. Not where you intended to be, not where you hope you are, where you are. This connection carried a contract, and the contract was specific. Not about whether the two of you end up together, not about a timeline or a destination, but about what each of you was required to learn about love itself in order to be capable of something genuinely real. Soul contracts are not romantic arrangements. They are precise agreements about what must be confronted. And the confrontation always happens through the people we love most, because those are the people we cannot protect ourselves from. The person who activates a soul contract is not doing it to you. They are doing it with you, whether they know it or not. And what this contract was always about, from the very first moment something between you ignited, was reciprocity. Not the surface question of whether they love you. The deeper question, have you been giving from fullness, or giving from the hope that enough giving would eventually generate proof that you are worth choosing? That is the precise question this contract was always building toward. And it is not a comfortable question. It does not land softly. Because the honest answer, for most people who have loved with this kind of depth and received this kind of inconsistency back, is that somewhere in the middle of it, the giving stopped being an expression of love and became a strategy. A way of earning something. A way of proving, through the volume and consistency of your care, that you were the kind of person who deserved to be kept. A way of making up in output what was missing in return. That was not a failure of character. That was the contract teaching its lesson through the only classroom it had available. The specific experience of loving someone whose capacity to receive was smaller than your capacity to give. And staying inside that experience long enough to finally see the dynamic with complete clarity. The grief of recognizing this is real. Don't rush past it. There is a specific quality to the grief of seeing clearly something you have been carrying for a long time. Not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but the quieter grief of finally naming something that was always true. The love was real. The grief is real. The imbalance was real. All of these things are true at the same time, and allowing them to be true simultaneously, without needing any of them to cancel out the others, is itself part of what the contract was always building toward. Here is what completion looks like through the lens of this particular lesson. You give because you want to, from what you actually have, without requiring it to produce external evidence that you are enough. The giving becomes self-sustaining rather than proof-seeking. And that shift does not require reunion to be real. It is already real. It is already present in how you moved through the last several months, even in the moments you didn't recognize it as anything other than surviving. The contract did not promise an outcome. It promised a change in who you are. And that promise has already been kept. The contract was always about what you were becoming, not about whether they stayed to witness it. What you became is already real, regardless of what they do next. Your body has been tracking this shift longer than your mind has been willing to name it. And the signals it is giving you right now are not confusion. They are orientation. There is a quiet that arrived in the last several weeks. Not the numb quiet of something shut down, and you know the difference, because you have felt both, but a different quality entirely. A stillness that has no urgency behind it. An evening that arrives and doesn't immediately feel like evidence of absence. A morning that starts without the first thought being the weight you have been carrying. Not every morning, not perfectly, but enough that you notice. Sleep arrives earlier than it used to. Not dramatically, but the threshold of the night feels lower, and the first minutes of waking carry less residue than they carried 3 months ago. The 3 a.m. thoughts still arrive sometimes, but they pass differently. Where they used to land and expand, now they arrive and move through. Where they used to feel like facts about reality, now they feel more like weather. That name, the one that used to arrive with a physical hook attached, the one that would land and immediately reorganize everything else around itself, passes through now differently. It is still there. You are not pretending it isn't. But the body's response has changed. Where it once braced, it now simply notes. Where it once mobilized everything, it now observes. The name does not take up the same interior space. This is not distance. This is integration. You may notice that you inhabit your own company differently. Not louder, not more performed, but more genuinely present. Where being alone once felt like a reminder of what was missing, it now feels, more often than not, like its own complete experience. Your nervous system is learning that silence does not always mean danger, that distance does not always mean loss. Most people spend years trying to teach their nervous system these things through willpower, and willpower doesn't reach this deep. What reaches this deep is the actual experience of surviving what you were afraid of and discovering you are still here, still whole. The settling is permanent. When the body stops preparing for loss, it begins preparing for arrival. Something about the quality of your days is becoming cleaner, not because the external circumstances have necessarily changed, but because something inside that was divided has stopped pulling in opposite directions. Decisions that used to require extended internal negotiation are starting to arrive with a clarity you don't have to generate. The answer is simply there, before the deliberation begins. The things that once required significant effort to refuse. The dynamic that cost you your peace, the connection that asked you to be smaller than you actually are. The situation where full presence was only ever one-directional. Those things register differently in your body now. Where it once took effort to hold a boundary, it now takes effort to understand why it was ever negotiable. Something shifted at the root. What could live here before cannot live here now? What used to feel exciting registers differently too. The chase that once felt like passion is now legible as anxiety wearing passion's clothing. The intensity that once felt like connection is now identifiable as the particular feeling of two people not quite meeting, and the strain of that non-meeting being mistaken for depth. You are not jaded. You are not harder. You are clearer. And clarity is not the enemy of love. It is the only honest condition under which real love can actually arrive and be recognized for what it is. Synchronicities are changing their character. They feel less like the universe urgently redirecting you, and more like the universe confirming where you already are. The signs are not guiding you towards something you haven't reached. They are arriving to acknowledge that you are already moving in the right direction. Something in the space around you has begun to organize itself differently, not because circumstances changed, but because the frequency you carry changed, and frequency is what the field responds to. Other people are more legible. The energetic reality of who someone is, their actual availability, their genuine capacity, their real willingness, arrives to your awareness faster and more accurately than it once did. Not because you are suspicious, because you are no longer filtering everything through the distortion of an unresolved wound. You are seeing clearly because there is less interference between what is actually there and your ability to read it. The part of you that needed outside confirmation to feel certain has completed its work. What remains does not require reflection to stay real. It simply is. That is not a small change. That is the whole change. After this activation, certain things become unavailable to your nervous system. Not as a rule you decided, not as a protective wall you consciously installed, but as a biological fact about what your system can no longer accommodate. Being held at emotional arm's length by someone who knows exactly what they feel. That pattern is no longer tolerable in the way it once was. Not because you have become harsh or guarded, but because the part of you that used to absorb that kind of distance and translate it as depth, the part that would explain it as complexity, as difficulty, as the particular cost of loving someone who is not yet ready to be fully known, that part no longer has the energy for that particular translation. The ambiguity doesn't read as interesting anymore. It reads as a choice they are making, a choice about whether you are worth the honesty, carrying the full weight of a connection while the other person remains comfortable in its ambiguity. This is what has shifted in you most fundamentally. The dynamic where you brought everything and they brought something, where you showed up fully and they showed up conditionally. That dynamic requires a specific internal posture to sustain. It requires you to keep reaching towards something that keeps its distance. And that posture has become unavailable to you. Not as a decision. As something closer to what happens when a muscle that has been held under tension for too long finally, completely releases. Not with drama, not with a moment of choice, but as the simple biological consequence of having held it longer than holding it was ever going to be sustainable. The reach is finished. Not because you gave up, because the body completed its reckoning with what the reaching was actually costing. Being asked to explain your depth to someone who uses your explanation as evidence that you are too much. That dynamic registers now before it fully forms. Something in you identifies the frequency early, before the full pattern has played out, before you have given it time to hurt you in the specific way it has hurt you before. The recognition arrives in the body first, ahead of any analysis. You don't have to deliberate. You already know. Waiting for honesty that the other person has already decided you don't deserve, that particular form of patience has completed its purpose. It was never patience, really. It was love trying to earn something that cannot be earned. The difference between those two things is now something you feel in the body immediately, not something you eventually arrive at after months of trying to make the situation work. What is available to you now is not less than what was available before. It is more specific, more real. And it will recognize you immediately because you have become impossible to miss. If the person connected to you steps back into your field now, through a message, through a moment, through a collision of circumstances that doesn't feel entirely accidental, what happens next will not be legible through the emotional lens you used to carry into it. The question is no longer whether you still want this. You know the answer to that. The question, the only one that actually matters now, is whether what returns is the same version of the dynamic or something genuinely new. And here is what is true. You are not waiting with held breath for that answer. You are not organizing your days around the possibility of their return. You are not scanning for signals the way you once were. What has happened inside you across this period means that when they enter your field, you will receive that moment clearly, without hope bending the signal, without fear bending it in the other direction. without the wound that used to run interference between what was actually arriving and your ability to read it accurately. If they return, and what returns is real, genuinely different in the way that only actual internal work produces, you will know. Not from what they say, from how their presence actually lands in your body. From whether the old pull arrives with the old anxiety attached to it, or whether something has changed in the quality of the contact itself. You will feel the difference between someone who missed the comfort and someone who changed for real. Not because you are looking for proof of their transformation, but because your nervous system no longer distorts the signal with need. What arrives will be received accurately, probably for the first time. If what returns is the old version, the same emotional template, the same patterns with different language around them, you will also know. Quickly, without the extended period of hoping that this particular iteration might be different. The clarity you have developed is not cruelty toward them. It is care toward yourself. It is the direct result of everything the contract required. If they do not return at all, that answer, too, will be received differently than it once would have been. Not as confirmation of what you feared about yourself, as information about the shape of what this connection was actually capable of offering. Both outcomes leave you whole, not as something you tell yourself to feel better, not as a consolation, but as something you are actually built from now. Something that is true in the way only things that came from real experience can be true. The gate opened for you today. Both directions from here lead somewhere real, not because the outcomes are equal, but because what you built is not contingent on which one arrives. Their return would be one thing landing into something already whole. Their non-return would confirm something that was always going to be true regardless. That the work was yours, the completion is yours, and what you are made of now cannot be taken by an absence. That is not consolation. That is the actual nature of what the karmic contract produced. And that is what the gate recognized when it opened. Don't let this just pass through. Like the video, subscribe, and in the comments, write, "The gate is open," out loud. That's not a small thing. That's you choosing to receive this, not just consume it. And if this found you at the right moment, it will find the right person through you too. Share it. Because here is what is actually true about where you stand today. Something is already here, not approaching, not on its way. Already present inside this day, inside this specific window, inside the frequency that Venus and Jupiter together are creating in the sign of Cancer, the sign of emotional memory, of depth, of the things that were never really over because they were never really finished. You have not missed it. You did not arrive too late. The work you did, the invisible, unrewarded, unwitnessed work of becoming someone who can hold what is arriving, that work is what brought you to this exact moment. The gate is not closing behind you. It opened for you specifically, in the way that doors open only for the people who built themselves, in private, across the full length of the silence, into someone capable of walking through. Not because you are special in a way that separates you from everyone else, but because you chose, again and again in small and private moments, to become the version of yourself that this moment has always been waiting for. What lands now lands into something solid. What arrives now arrives to someone who is genuinely ready, not performing ready, not hoping to be ready, but built into readiness through the full weight of what you actually went through. You don't have to do anything with this right now. You don't have to decide or reach or prove that you received it. What arrived today arrived, and it arrived to you.